A millionaire saw twin children crying next to an abandoned car. When he got closer, he was shocked by what he found. The rain fell in relentless sheets, drumming against the windshield of Lucas Perez's sleek black sedan. The rhythmic hum of the wipers did little to cut through the streaked blur of the country road ahead. The world outside was cloaked in muted greys, the rain swallowing everything into a haze. Lucas gripped the leather wheel tighter, his knuckles pale against the dim glow of the dashboard. He wasn't supposed to be on this road. It was a detour, an inconvenience forced by a traffic jam downtown. But here he was, driving through the kind of isolation he hadn't experienced in years. The empty stretch of asphalt, flanked by towering firs, felt as unfamiliar to him as the silence of his own company. Then he saw them. Two small figures, drenched and trembling, stood by the side of the road. They were motionless at first glance, but as his headlights swept over them, the taller one, a boy, maybe 8 or 9, raised an arm in a weak wave. Beside him, a younger girl clung to his side, her face buried in his shoulder. Lucas gently depressed the accelerator, causing the car to come to a halt a few yards away. For a moment, he hesitated, the engine's low purr filling the cabin. This wasn't his business. It wasn't his problem. But the boy raised his arm again, this time more urgently. Lucas sighed, his breath fogging the cool air. "What the hell are you doing, Perez?" he muttered, shoving open the door. The rain hit him like icy needles, seeping through his suit as he jogged toward the children. Up close, they looked even smaller. The boy's clothes hung limply on his thin frame, soaked through, while the girl's matted hair clung to her cheeks, streaked with mud. "Hey," Lucas said, his voice careful even. "What's going on? Are you hurt?" The boy shook his head, his lips trembling. "Our mum," he croaked, barely audible over the rain. He pointed to the dark shape of a car crumpled against the trees, its nose buried in the embankment. Lucas followed the boy's gaze, his stomach sinking. The car was a mess, its hood bent at an unnatural angle, the passenger door ajar. The faint, metallic tang of gasoline mixed with the earthy smell of rain-soaked dirt. "Stay here," he said firmly, glancing at both children. "Don't move." The boy didn't respond, just tightened his grip on the girl, who whimpered softly. Lucas jogged toward the wreck, his shoes slipping on the slick gravel. He peered inside the open door and froze. A woman lay slumped against the steering wheel, her dark hair obscuring her face. Her chest rose and fell faintly, but the shallow breaths were enough to send him into action. "Mom," Lucas called, his voice steady but urgent. He leaned in, careful not to disturb the airbag crumpled against her. "Can you hear me?" She didn't stir. Lucas cursed under his breath, his hand brushing against her wrist. Her pulse was there, weak but steady. He scanned the interior, noting the scattered papers and the faint smell of oil. Whatever had caused this crash, it had been violent. He turned back toward the boy and girl. "What's your name?" he asked the boy, his words firm but not unkind. "Roy," the boy replied, his chin trembling. "And hers?" "Doris." Lucas nodded. "Roy, I need you to stay with your sister, all right? Keep her close to you. I'm going to get your mom out of here. She's going to be okay," he said aloud, more for the kids than himself. The woman's weight was lighter than he expected as he carefully lifted her from the driver's seat. Her head lolled against his chest, and he noticed the faint streaks of blood on her temple. The rain made her seem even more fragile, her clothes soaked and clinging to her thin frame. "Mister?" Roy's voice cracked, barely holding steady. "It's Lucas," he replied, cradling the woman as he carried her toward his car. "And I'll make sure she gets help." The boy nodded, his face pale but resolute. Lucas pulled his phone from his pocket, dialing 911 as he worked. "There's been an accident," he said quickly when the operator answered. "A woman and her 2 kids. They're stranded on Greenridge Road near mile marker 12. I need an ambulance." With instructions given, Lucas pocketed the phone and leaned back into the car. His arms slipped under the woman's shoulders, his movements careful and deliberate. She was lighter than he expected, her limp body an unsettling contrast to the strength of his grip. The boy and girl watched as Lucas carried their mother to his car, his own drenched form illuminated briefly by the glow of the interior lights. He eased her into the back seat, draping a dry blanket he'd found in the trunk over her. "Get in," he said to the children, his voice softening despite the urgency. "You'll be warmer in here." The boy hesitated, glancing at his sister, who clung to him like a lifeline. Then, without a word, he led her to the passenger seat and climbed in after her. Lucas closed the door behind them, sealing the cold and wet outside. Inside the car, the girl finally spoke, her voice no louder than a whisper. "Is Mommy gonna be okay?" Lucas hesitated, meeting her wide, tearful eyes in the rearview mirror. "She's strong," he said finally. "We'll get her to the hospital. She'll be okay." As he pulled back onto the road, the rain hammered harder, the wipers struggling to keep up. The boy's silent watchfulness and the girl's quiet sniffles filled the air, but Lucas's hands on the wheel were steady. He felt something other than detachment. He felt the weight of responsibility. And he didn't hate it. The fluorescent lights in the hospital corridor buzzed faintly, casting a pale, sterile glow over the rows of chairs. Lucas Perez sat stiffly in one, his suit jacket draped over the armrest beside him. His fingers drummed a slow, unconscious rhythm on his knee as his gaze flicked between the twins seated near him. Roy sat upright, arms crossed tightly, his small shoulders squared as though bracing for another fight. Beside him, Doris leaned against his side, her tiny fingers clutching his sleeve like a lifeline. They hadn't spoken since arriving. Neither had Lucas. The rhythmic beep of machines filtered faintly from beyond the door at the end of the hall. Inside, their mother was recovering, though the nurse hadn't been specific about how serious her condition was. Lucas glanced at his watch. 2 hours had passed since the doctor assured him the woman would be fine. He still didn't know her name. "Do you want water?" he asked, breaking the silence. His voice, though steady, sounded foreign to him in the quiet. Roy looked up, his eyes narrowing slightly. "We're fine," he said, his voice clipped. Lucas nodded, leaning back in his chair. It was clear the boy wasn't ready to trust him, and who could blame him? The door at the end of the hall opened with a soft click, and a nurse stepped out. She approached Lucas, her face professional but kind. "She's awake now," she said. "Still a little disoriented, but stable." Lucas stood, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt. "Can I see her?" The nurse hesitated, glancing at the children. "Perhaps just you for now. Let her get her bearings before seeing too much at once." Lucas nodded, then looked at Roy. "I'll check on her. You two stay here. I won't be long." Roy said nothing, but his posture remained rigid as Lucas followed the nurse down the corridor. Inside the small hospital room, Megan stirred against the stark white sheets. Her hair, still damp from the rain, clung to her temples, and her face was pale under the fluorescent lights. Her eyes fluttered open as Lucas approached the bed, her expression shifting from confusion to guardedness. "Who?" she started, her voice dry and cracked. "You're at the hospital," Lucas said simply, keeping his distance. "You were in an accident. I found you and your kids on the road." At the mention of her children, her body tensed. "Roy? Doris? Are they—" "They're fine," he interrupted gently. "They're just outside, a little shaken but unharmed." Megan exhaled sharply, her hand pressing against her chest as though steadying herself. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Lucas nodded. "You were lucky. That crash could have been much worse." Her eyes narrowed slightly, suspicion flickering across her face. Why would you stop?" "Most people wouldn't." Lucas hesitated. It wasn't an easy question to answer. He leaned against the counter by the sink, his gaze steady but distant. "Because I couldn't not stop," he said finally, his tone firm but devoid of embellishment. No one else was around. It wasn't a choice, really. Megan studied him, her expression softening just enough to reveal her exhaustion. She shifted in the bed, wincing slightly as she adjusted her position. "The kids," she said again, almost to herself. "They're safe," Lucas reiterated. "They've been waiting for you to wake up." The room fell into silence, broken only by the faint beeping of the monitor beside her. Lucas's eyes lingered on Megan's face, noting the lines of worry etched deeply into her features. She looked like someone who hadn't rested in weeks, maybe longer. "You don't have to talk," he said after a moment. "But if there's something I should know, something that could help, I'm listening." Megan's gaze darted to the window, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of the blanket. Her lips parted as though she might speak, but she closed them again, the words retreating before they could form. "It's okay," Lucas said, sensing her hesitation. "You don't have to decide right now." Megan met his eyes directly. There was no gratitude in her stare, not yet. Just a wary acknowledgement that, for now, he wasn't a threat. "Thank you," she said again, her voice steadier this time. "For helping them. For helping me." Lucas nodded once, his expression unreadable. "Rest," he said. "I'll bring Roy and Doris in soon." He turned to leave, pausing briefly at the door to glance back. Megan had closed her eyes again, her face turned toward the window. In the hallway, Roy and Doris looked up as he returned. "Can we see her now?" Roy asked, his voice small but determined. Lucas crouched to their level, his gaze steady. "She's asking for you," he said. Doris's grip on her brother's arm loosened slightly, and for the first time, a faint glimmer of relief passed between the two children. Lucas straightened, motioning toward the door. "Go ahead." As they walked into the room, Lucas stayed behind, leaning against the wall just outside. He folded his arms across his chest, the faint hum of the hospital lights filling the silence. For now, they were safe. But something in Megan's eyes told him her story was far from over. The rain had stopped by the time Lucas parked his car in the circular driveway of his home. The house, a sprawling structure of dark wood and glass, loomed quietly against the Seattle skyline. Its large windows reflected the distant lights of the city, but the inside was dark, still, and lifeless. He hesitated for a moment, gripping the wheel before turning to his passengers. Megan sat stiffly in the seat beside him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. In the back, Roy and Doris dozed off, their small bodies curled against each other, the exhaustion of the day finally overcoming them. The long and thin silence between him and Megan on the drive was laden with unspoken words. Lucas broke it. "You can stay here," he said, his voice even. "For now." Megan's head turned toward him, her expression cautious. "I'll leave as soon as I can walk without falling over," she said, her tone clipped. "I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing," Lucas replied, his gaze steady but unreadable. "You need rest. The kids need somewhere safe." Her fingers tightened around each other, the tension in her knuckles visible even in the dim light. "It's temporary," she murmured, half to herself. "I won't be a burden." Lucas didn't respond immediately, instead stepping out of the car and opening the back door. He gently lifted Doris, who murmured something incomprehensible, but didn't wake, her small face pressing against his shoulder. Roy stirred as Lucas reached for him, but the boy straightened, rubbing his eyes. "I can walk," Roy said, his voice groggy but firm. He slid out of the car and stood unsteadily before following Lucas and Megan toward the house. The front door opened to a space that was pristine and expansive, but eerily devoid of warmth. High ceilings and polished hardwood floors created an echo with every step. The living room stretched wide, anchored by a stone fireplace that hadn't seen a flame in years. Megan hesitated on the threshold, her arms tightening protectively around herself. "You live here alone?" Lucas nodded, leading them further in. "I'm rarely home." "It shows," Megan muttered under her breath, though there wasn't malice in her tone, just observation. She glanced at the twins as Lucas showed them a set of stairs leading to a guest room. "Beds are upstairs," he said. "There's a spare room with 2 twins. It's clean." Roy nodded and followed the direction of Lucas's hand, his protective instincts driving him to settle his sister in before worrying about himself. Megan lingered behind, her eyes scanning the quiet, immaculate space. There were no personal touches, no photographs or signs of a life lived here. Just a house, functional and impersonal. Lucas noticed her scrutiny. "I told you," he said. "I'm rarely here." Megan exhaled, shifting awkwardly. "Thank you," she said after a pause. "For all of this, for helping us." "You don't have to thank me," Lucas replied. "Just get some rest." She gave a faint nod, her eyes dropping to the polished floor before she turned and followed her children upstairs. Lucas stood motionless for a moment, listening to the soft creak of footsteps fading. Then, with a quiet sigh, he shrugged off his jacket and hung it on the back of a chair. Upstairs, Megan settled the twins into their beds, smoothing the blanket over Doris's small form. The girl murmured something in her sleep, and Megan's hand froze for a moment, her breath catching. She wasn't used to this. Quiet, safety. It felt foreign, and with it came the creeping unease of waiting for it to be ripped away. Roy's eyes were open, watching her from across the room. "Is he a good guy?" he asked suddenly, his voice hushed but sharp with curiosity. Megan paused, sitting on the edge of Doris's bed. "I don't know," she admitted softly. "But he helped us. That's enough for now." Roy frowned but didn't press. He rolled onto his side, pulling the blanket up to his chin. "You'll stay close, right?" "I'm not going anywhere," Megan said firmly. She smoothed his hair back, a rare gesture of affection that surprised both of them. Downstairs, Lucas sat on the edge of the leather couch, a glass of water untouched in his hands. He stared into the darkness of the fireplace, his mind restless. The twins' quiet resilience reminded him of Charles's laughter, the way his old friend used to joke about the weight of the world. He shook his head, brushing the thought away. This wasn't about Charles. Not yet. Footsteps on the stairs pulled him from his thoughts. Megan appeared, her frame silhouetted against the faint glow of the hallway light. "I'll help with whatever you need tomorrow," she said, crossing her arms. "I'm not here to freeload." "You're here to heal," Lucas replied, his tone matter-of-fact. "That's enough." Megan hesitated, searching his face, as though trying to decide whether to argue. Instead, she nodded faintly and disappeared back upstairs. The house settled into silence once more. Lucas leaned back, the weight of his unexpected guests a faint pressure against the edges of his carefully maintained life. For the first time in a long time, he didn't mind. The morning light filtered through the wide glass windows of Lucas's home, casting long streaks of warmth over the polished floors. Megan, standing barefoot in the kitchen, let her gaze wander across the open space. The silence felt strange, too still, too expansive. Her hands curled around the ceramic mug Lucas had offered her earlier. the tea inside long forgotten as she tried to make sense of her surroundings. Lucas's house was breathtaking in a way that felt detached, like a museum rather than a home. Each room was carefully curated, sleek furniture, abstract art, and not a single thing out of place. Yet there were no signs of life, no scattered shoes, no fingerprints on the glass, no photographs. Doesn't feel lived in, does it? Lucas's voice broke the quiet. He stood in the doorway, his tie half knotted, and a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Megan started, turning sharply. "Sorry, I wasn't trying to snoop." "You weren't," he said simply, adjusting the tie and walking toward her. "It's just how this place is. I'm rarely here long enough to change that." Megan studied him carefully. His tone was light, but there was an undercurrent of something she couldn't quite name. She nodded faintly, taking a small sip of the now cool tea. "I should go check on the kids," she said, moving to leave. "They're still asleep," Lucas replied. "They looked exhausted. Let them rest." Her steps faltered. "I'm not used to this," she admitted, the words coming reluctantly. "What? A quiet morning?" "A quiet anything," she said, setting the mug down. Lucas didn't respond, his expression softening slightly. Later, Megan found herself wandering through the house, her bare feet padding softly on the hardwood. The twins were still sleeping, and Lucas had retreated to his office, leaving her with the uncomfortable luxury of time to herself. She hadn't had a moment like this in years. The hallway on the second floor was lined with bookshelves, the spines neatly arranged by size. Megan ran her fingers along the edges, her gaze scanning the titles. There was something comforting about their order, even if it felt out of place in her current chaos. At the end of the hall, a door stood ajar, leading to what she assumed was a study. She hesitated before stepping inside, her curiosity outweighing her reservations. The room was just as pristine as the rest of the house. A large mahogany desk sat near the window, papers stacked neatly in a tray. On the wall above it hung a collage of framed photographs. It was the first personal touch she'd seen in the entire house. Megan approached, her eyes flicking over the images. Most were candid, Lucas with colleagues at formal events, a few casual shots of him outdoors. Her gaze stopped on one in particular. It was a photo of Lucas standing on a golf course, grinning broadly, his arms slung over the shoulders of another man. The other man's face was immediately recognizable. Her breath hitched. Megan's hand rose instinctively, fingers brushing the edge of the frame as if touching it would confirm the truth. It couldn't be. "What are you doing in here?" Lucas's voice startled her, and she turned sharply to see him standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. She started, her words catching in her throat. "Who is this?" Lucas stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as they followed her gaze to the photograph. "That's Charles," he said quietly. "Charles Wright, my best friend." Megan's stomach twisted, the weight of his words sinking into her like lead. "Charles Wright?" Megan repeated, her voice barely audible above a whisper. "Yes. Why?" Her legs felt unsteady beneath her, but she didn't move. I know him," she said finally, her voice trembling. Lucas frowned, stepping closer. "What do you mean? You know him?" She turned to face him fully, her breath uneven. "Lucas, I saw him, just weeks ago." Her words came faster now, her composure cracking. "Fletcher killed him." The room seemed to freeze. Lucas's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, and then to something darker. "What did you just say?" "Fletcher," Megan repeated, her voice breaking. "He shot Charles. I saw it. It wasn't a suicide." For a long moment, Lucas said nothing. His hands curled into fists at his sides, his jaw tightening as the words sank in. "You're telling me," he said slowly, his voice low, "that my best friend, Was murdered? Megan nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. I didn't know his name until now, but I saw it happen. Fletcher staged it to look like he did it to himself. Lucas turned away abruptly, one hand gripping the back of the desk chair. His breathing was uneven, the muscles in his shoulders taut. Megan stood, frozen, the weight of her confession hanging heavy in the air. I need you to tell me everything, Lucas said finally, his voice tight. Megan hesitated as the fear she had been suppressing began to surface. I will, she said, softly. But you need to know. It's not just Charles. Fletcher has done worse. A lot worse. Lucas turned back to her, his eyes sharp and unyielding. Then we're going to make sure he pays for all of it. Megan sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped tightly around a steaming cup of tea Lucas had placed in front of her. She hadn't taken a sip. Her eyes darted between the large glass windows that framed the early morning light and the polished wood beneath her fingers, as though searching for stability in the quiet, sterile room. Lucas leaned against the counter, his arms crossed. His usual composed demeanor was cracking, his jaw tight and his expression distant. The weight of Megan's revelation hung between them like a storm cloud, heavy and waiting to burst. You are a housekeeper, Lucas said finally, his voice low but sharp with curiosity. For Fletcher. Megan nodded, her fingers tightening around the cup. For almost 3 years, she began, her tone carefully measured. It was a good job at first. The pay was decent, the hours long but manageable. I kept to myself. Did what was asked. Lucas's gaze never left her, but he said nothing, waiting for her to continue. I started noticing things about a year in, she said, her voice faltering slightly. Conversations I wasn't supposed to hear. Men coming and going at odd hours, always in suits, always carrying briefcases. Her lips pressed together as she struggled to steady her breathing. It wasn't my business, so I didn't ask questions. But then, there was Charles. Lucas's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. He came to the house a few weeks ago, Megan continued, her voice growing quieter. He was different from the others. Polite, respectful. But there was tension between him and Fletcher. I didn't know why at first, but then I heard them arguing. I couldn't make out everything, but Charles was accusing Fletcher of something big. She paused, her eyes clouded with the memory. Fletcher told him to stop meddling, and when Charles refused, she swallowed hard, her hands trembling. I was cleaning in the hallway when I heard the gunshot. I ran to the study and he was just lying there, on the floor. Lucas's knuckles turned white as his grip on the counter tightened. Fletcher didn't even hesitate, Megan said, her voice breaking. He called his men, told them to make it look like a suicide, and then he just went back to work, like it was nothing. The room fell into a suffocating silence. Lucas's breathing was slow and deliberate, but the tension in his posture was palpable. And the documents? He asked after a moment, his voice rough. Megan blinked, her focus snapping back to him. I found them in his office a few days later. Files, records, lists of names. I didn't understand everything, but it was clear they were important and incriminating. I took them and hid them in my car. I planned to, I don't know, go to the police maybe. But then I panicked. She looked down, shame creeping into her voice. I didn't know who to trust, so I ran. Lucas straightened, his expression hardening with resolve. Where are the documents now? Megan felt a sinking sensation in her stomach. They're still in the car, she whispered. Lucas's phone buzzed on the counter, cutting through the heavy silence. He picked it up, his eyes narrowing as he read the caller ID. "It's your insurance company," he said, holding the phone out to her. Megan took it with trembling hands, answering cautiously. The voice on the other end was calm, informing her that the repairs on her car were underway and that it would be ready for pickup in a few days. When she hung up, Lucas was already moving. "We need to get those documents," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Megan hesitated, the enormity of what she'd just confessed weighing on her like a lead blanket. "It's too dangerous," she murmured. "Fletcher will be looking for me." "For us?" "That's why we do this smart," Lucas said, his voice firm. "I'll use my contacts and make some calls. We'll get the documents, and we'll make sure Fletcher doesn't get away with this." Megan studied him, searching his face for any sign of doubt. She found none. "What about Roy and Doris?" she asked quietly. "They'll stay here," Lucas replied without hesitation. "Safe. I'll make sure of it." She nodded slowly, her resolve hardening. "All right," she said. "But this isn't just about Charles. Fletcher has hurt so many people. Those documents, they're not just evidence, they're justice." Lucas's gaze softened, but the steel in his eyes remained. "Then we make sure they're used the right way." As Megan stood, the weight of her decision settling over her, Lucas placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "We'll get through this," he said simply. After all the time, Megan allowed herself to believe him. Lucas parked his car in the driveway, his hands still gripping the steering wheel as he scanned the street. It was late, the kind of quiet that blanketed even a bustling city like Seattle. Yet tonight, it felt different, weighted. The shadows seemed thicker, the streetlights dimmer. He'd felt it during the drive back from retrieving the documents. A faint tug at the edge of his instincts, a sense of being followed. He reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found a name. The call was brief, his instructions clipped. "I need a full security system installed. Tonight." Inside the house, Megan was in the kitchen, clearing the dishes from dinner. She looked up as he entered, her expression tightening when she saw the stack of documents under his arm. "You got them," she said, her voice a mix of relief and dread. "They were right where you said they'd be," Lucas replied, setting the files on the counter. His movements were deliberate, careful, as though the papers might combust under the wrong touch. "But I think someone's watching. I've called for security." Megan's eyes widened. "You mean—" "Fletcher knows you're alive, Megan," Lucas said bluntly. "And he knows those documents are missing. It's only a matter of time before he puts it together." The tension in the room thickened. Megan's gaze flicked toward the stairs, where Roy and Doris were fast asleep. "I don't care what happens to me," she said softly, her voice trembling. "But I can't let anything happen to them. They're my priority too," Lucas assured her. "I'll keep them safe." The security team arrived within the hour. Burly men in dark jackets carried equipment through the front door, their voices low as they discussed camera placement and alarm coverage. Lucas oversaw the installation, his usual air of detachment replaced by something sharper, more purposeful. Megan hovered in the background, watching the transformation of the house. Cameras now lined the exterior, their sleek lenses catching the faint glow of the porch light. Keypads were installed at every entry point and motion detectors dotted the hallways. When the team finally left, Lucas locked the door behind them and turned to Megan. "This should buy us some time," he said. Megan nodded, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "I hope it's enough." The attack came at midnight the next day. Megan jolted awake to the sound of glass shattering downstairs. Her first thought was the twins. Throwing off the blanket, she rushed to their room, finding Roy already awake, his arms protectively around Doris. "Mum?" Roy's voice was small, but steady. "Stay here," Megan whispered, crouching to meet his eyes. Lock the door, and don't come out until I say." Roy nodded, his face pale but determined. Megan kissed his forehead before stepping into the hallway, her heart hammering in her chest. Downstairs, Lucas was already moving. He had a baseball bat in one hand and his phone in the other, dialing the police. The sound of footsteps echoed from the living room, heavy and purposeful. "Megan!" he hissed, motioning for her to stay back. But it was too late. Two men emerged from the shadows, their faces obscured by ski masks. One of them held a gun, the barrel gleaming in the faint light. "Where are the kids?" the man demanded, his voice rough. "Get out of my house," Lucas said, his tone cold and commanding. The man with the gun sneered, stepping closer. "We're not here for you, Perez. Hand over the documents or things get messy." Megan appeared at the top of the stairs, clutching the railing for support. "Leave them alone," she said, her voice shaking but firm. The second man moved swiftly, grabbing her arm and pulling her down the stairs. Lucas lunged, but the gunman aimed the barrel at him, halting his advance. "Don't try to be a hero," the man growled. Megan struggled against her captor, her mind racing. "The kids have nothing to do with this," she pleaded. "Then give us what we want," the gunman said. Before Megan could respond, the sound of sirens filled the air. The attackers froze, their eyes darting toward the windows. "Cops," the second man hissed. Lucas took the opportunity, swinging the bat with all his strength. The gunman stumbled back, his grip loosening just enough for Megan to break free. She scrambled toward Lucas as the men retreated, disappearing into the night just as the police arrived. "What country were you in when you heard this story? Leave your information in the comments section below." The officers swept through the house, taking statements and checking for evidence. Megan sat on the couch, her arms wrapped tightly around Roy and Doris, who had been brought down once the danger had passed. "They'll come back," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Lucas stood nearby, his expression grim. "Not if we're ready for them," he said. Megan looked up, her eyes meeting his. "We can't keep running," she said, her voice steadier now. "We have to stop him." Lucas nodded, his resolve hardening. "And we will." The morning after the invasion was quiet, but not in the soothing way Megan remembered from her old life. It was the kind of quiet that stretched tight, vibrating with unspoken fears and what-ifs. She sat at the dining table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Across from her, Lucas typed on his laptop, his face impassive but his jaw clenched. Roy and Doris were upstairs, their laughter conspicuously absent. The house felt like it had taken a deep breath and was holding it, waiting for the next storm. "I think we need to get away," Lucas said suddenly, breaking the silence. His eyes stayed fixed on the screen, but Megan could feel the weight of his words. "Get away," she echoed, her voice wary. "For a few days," Lucas clarified, finally looking up. "The kids need it. You need it." Megan frowned, her fingers tightening on the mug. "And what happens if Fletcher finds us gone? If he tracks us down somewhere else?" "We'll take precautions," Lucas replied, his tone firm. "I'll notify the security company to monitor the house, and I'll keep the location private. But staying here, on edge, isn't sustainable." Megan hesitated, her gaze dropping to the table. She wanted to argue, but she couldn't deny the exhaustion in Roy's face, the fear in Doris's eyes every time a shadow crossed the window. "All right," she said finally. But only for a few days. By late afternoon they were on the road. Lucas drove with steady confidence, the sprawling cityscape of Seattle fading into rolling hills and dense trees. The SUV was packed lightly, just the essentials, plus the ever-present documents Lucas refused to leave behind. Roy and Doris sat in the back seat, their silence gradually giving way to murmured questions, and then soft giggles as Lucas told a dry, sarcastic story about his disastrous attempt at fishing years ago. Megan watched them in the rearview mirror, the sight of their smiles tugging at something deep inside her. Lucas parked near a secluded beach, stepping out and inhaling deeply as the salty air filled his lungs. "Come on," he said, gesturing for the others to follow. Megan hesitated, but Roy and Doris were already scrambling out of the car, their eyes lighting up at the sight of the ocean. She glanced at Lucas, who gave her a small nod, then followed the children toward the water. The sound of laughter echoed across the sand as Roy and Doris chased each other along the shoreline, their bare feet splashing through the shallow waves. Megan watched them with a mix of relief and trepidation. It had been so long since she'd seen them carefree. "They're resilient," Lucas said, his voice breaking the quiet. He stood a few feet away, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. Megan nodded, her gaze fixed on the twins. "They have to be." Lucas shifted, his eyes drifting to the horizon. "Charles used to say the same thing about me," he said, his voice quieter now. Megan turned to him, her brow furrowing. "He was more than my best friend," Lucas continued. "He was like a brother. We grew up together, did everything together. When I started my business, he was the one who convinced me to take the risk. Said I couldn't fail if I had him in my corner." His voice faltered, and Megan saw his jaw tighten. "When I heard he'd taken his life, I didn't believe it. Not for a second. But everyone else did. The police, the press, even his family." Lucas's hands clenched into fists, the weight of his grief evident in every word. "I should have done more, asked more questions. I knew something didn't add up, but I didn't push hard enough." Megan hesitated before stepping closer. "You couldn't have known," she said softly. "I should have," Lucas replied, his voice sharp. He exhaled, his shoulders slumping slightly. "But now I do, and I won't let Fletcher get away with it." Megan nodded, her resolve mirroring his. "We'll stop him. For Charles. For everyone he's hurt." Lucas turned to her, his gaze steady. "And for you. For your kids." Roy and Doris's laughter brought a brief reprieve from the heaviness of their conversation. The twins had built a small sand castle near the water's edge, their hands caked with wet sand. "Mom, come see," Roy called, waving her over. Megan walked toward them, her lips curving into a faint smile as she knelt beside their creation. Lucas followed, his presence quieter but no less significant. "You've got some architects in the making," he said, crouching down to inspect the castle. Roy beamed at the praise, his earlier wariness toward Lucas now replaced with something closer to admiration. Doris tugged at Lucas' sleeve, her eyes wide. "Can we make it bigger?" Lucas smiled, the expression genuine. "I think we can manage that." For the next hour, the four of them worked together, their hands digging into the sand as they expanded the castle. For a moment, the danger and fear that had shadowed them seemed to fade, replaced by the simple joy of creation. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the beach in hues of orange and gold, Megan sat on a weathered log, watching Lucas with the twins. He had helped them collect seashells, his once guarded demeanor softening with each laugh and smile they shared. She realized then that Lucas wasn't just protecting them out of obligation. He cared, deeply, fiercely. And despite her initial mistrust, she found herself beginning to care too. But the weight of reality lingered, pulling her thoughts back to Fletcher. Somewhere, he was planning his next move. His failure to retrieve the documents wouldn't be the end of it. She knew him well enough to know that he wouldn't stop until he found her, and silenced her for good. In a dimly lit office back in Seattle, Fletcher stood by the window, his phone pressed to his ear. His expression was cold, his voice a low growl as he barked orders. "I don't care how much it costs," he snapped. "Find her. I want this handled personally." He ended the call, his jaw tight with anger. The failure of his men had been a humiliation he wouldn't tolerate. This time, he would take matters into his own hands. The drive back to Seattle was quiet, the kind of silence that felt fragile, like glass on the verge of cracking. The twins were asleep in the back seat, their heads resting against each other as the hum of the car soothed them into peaceful slumber. Megan sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her eyes scanning the road ahead and the side mirrors, tension etched into every line of her face. Lucas's grip on the steering wheel was firm, his gaze fixed on the highway, but his mind churned with unease. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the prickling sensation at the back of his neck growing stronger with every passing mile. "We're being followed," Lucas said suddenly, his voice low but certain. Megan stiffened, turning sharply to glance at the side mirror. She saw nothing but the faint glow of headlights in the distance, but her heart began to race. "How can you tell?" "I just can't," Lucas replied, his jaw tight. "Hold on." He pressed his foot harder on the gas, the engine's hum rising as the SUV surged forward. Behind them, the headlights grew brighter, closing the gap with unsettling speed. "Wake the kids," Lucas instructed, his voice calm but firm. Megan twisted in her seat, reaching back to shake Roy and Doris awake. "Roy, Doris, listen to me," she said, her voice trembling. "Stay quiet and hold on tight, okay?" The children stirred, their sleepy confusion quickly replaced by fear as they registered the urgency in her voice. "Lucas, what do we do?" Megan asked, panic creeping into her tone. Lucas's eyes darted to the rearview mirror. "We split up," he said. "What?" "No." Megan's voice rose, but Lucas was already pulling off the main road, turning sharply onto a dirt path that cut through the thick forest. The SUV jolted and bounced on the uneven ground, the twins clutching each other tightly in the back seat. Megan's hand gripped the door handle as she turned to Lucas, her voice urgent. "What do you mean, split up?" Lucas didn't answer immediately, his focus locked on the dark path ahead. Finally he spoke, his tone brooking no argument. "I'll take the documents and lead them away. You stay with the kids in the car. Lock the doors and don't move until I say." "Lucas, that's insane." "It's the only way," he cut her off, his eyes flashing with determination. Lucas abruptly pulled the car to a halt. He reached into the center console, pulling out a small handgun and placing it in Megan's trembling hands. "What?" "Just in case," he said firmly, meeting her wide-eyed gaze. "You know what to do if you have to." Before she could argue, Lucas grabbed the documents from the back seat, slipped out of the car, and slammed the door shut. "Lock it," he mouthed through the window. Megan fumbled with the controls, her hands shaking as the locks clicked into place. Outside, Lucas took off into the trees, the faint beam of a flashlight bouncing in his hand as he disappeared into the darkness. The sound of tires crunching on gravel filled the air as another car skidded to a stop nearby. Megan's heart pounded in her chest as two men emerged, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. "Check the car," one of them barked, his voice sharp and cold. Megan ducked down, pulling the twins closer as the men approached. Her mind raced, the weight of the gun in her lap both reassuring and terrifying. One of the men reached the driver's side window, his face obscured by shadows. He peered inside, his flashlight sweeping over the empty front seat before moving toward the back. "She's in there," he called out, pounding on the window. "Open up." Megan didn't move, her breath shallow as her fingers tightened around the gun. The second man joined him, his expression dark. "You've got nowhere to go, lady. Hand over the documents, and no one gets hurt." Megan's eyes darted to the forest, hoping for any sign of Lucas. She couldn't see him, but she knew he was out there, running, drawing them away. The first man pulled a crowbar from his belt, raising it toward the window. Last chance. Megan didn't let him finish. Her hands steadied as she raised the gun, the barrel trembling but aimed directly at him. "Back off," she said, her voice shaking but firm. The man froze, his eyes narrowing as he assessed her. "You won't shoot," he sneered. "Try me," Megan shot back, her grip tightening. The second man took a step forward, and Megan pulled the trigger. The gunshot shattered the stillness, echoing through the forest as the first man stumbled back, clutching his shoulder with a pained cry. Megan's chest heaved as she kept the gun trained on them. "Stay away from my kids," she said, her voice stronger now. The second man grabbed his partner, dragging him back toward their car. "Let's go," he snarled, retreating into the darkness. Megan's hands shook as the adrenaline coursed through her. She turned to the twins, who were huddled together in the back seat, their eyes wide with fear. "It's okay," she whispered, though her voice cracked. "It's over." But she knew it wasn't. Deeper in the forest, Lucas's lungs burned as he ran, the sound of heavy footsteps closing in behind him. The documents were clutched tightly in his hands, his mind racing as he darted between the trees. "Enough running," a voice growled from the shadows. Lucas turned, just as Fletcher stepped into view, a cold smile spreading across his face. "We finally meet," Fletcher said, his tone mocking. Lucas's heart pounded, but he stood his ground. "You won't get away with this." Fletcher's smile widened, his gun glinting in the faint moonlight. "We'll see about that." The forest was silent, the stillness broken only by Lucas's labored breathing and the faint rustle of leaves beneath his feet. The documents clutched in his hand felt heavier with every step. He pressed his back against a tree, trying to steady his breath, straining to hear the footsteps of his pursuers. "Keep moving, Perez," Fletcher's voice cut through the darkness, sharp and taunting. "You won't make it far." Lucas glanced down at the crumpled documents. The weight of what they represented pushed him forward, even as exhaustion clawed at his limbs. He wasn't running just for himself. He was running for Megan, for her kids, and for Charles. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, forcing Lucas to press himself deeper into the shadows. Two men passed just a few yards away, their voices low and tense. "Where'd he go?" one of them hissed. "He's close," the other replied. "He won't get far. Fletcher wants him alive, for now." Lucas's jaw tightened. He shifted slowly, his movements deliberate, careful not to disturb the brush underfoot. The distant crack of a branch snapped his attention to another direction. Fletcher. Lucas knew he couldn't outrun them forever. His mind raced, weighing his options. He spotted a dense thicket ahead and darted toward it, his body low to the ground. The rough branches scratched at his arms and face, but he didn't care. He needed a plan, and he needed one fast. At the car, Megan's hands still shook as she dialed the police. Roy and Doris clung to her, their small frames pressed against her sides. "Yes, we've been attacked," she said, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. "They're in the forest, and I don't know how many. Please hurry." She ended the call, her heart pounding. Her mind raced with the image of Lucas disappearing into the woods, the documents in his hands like a beacon for Fletcher and his men. "Stay here," she said firmly to the twins. "Mum, no." Roy grabbed her arm. Megan knelt down, cupping his face. "Listen to me. Lock the doors and don't open them for anyone but me or the police. Do you understand?" Roy hesitated, but finally nodded, his eyes brimming with tears. Megan grabbed the gun Lucas had given her and stepped out into the cold night. Lucas's reprieve was short-lived. "Got you now," a voice snarled as a flashlight beam pinned him against a tree. Lucas turned, his fists clenched as two men emerged from the darkness. One aimed a gun at him, while the other gestured for him to move. "Fletcher wants a word," the armed man sneered. Lucas said nothing, his jaw tightening as he calculated his next move. Before he could act, Fletcher stepped into the clearing, his expression smug. The gun in his hand gleamed under the faint moonlight, and his presence radiated menace. "Lucas Perez," Fletcher drawled, his tone almost mocking. "You've been quite a nuisance." "Better get used to it," Lucas shot back, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. Fletcher chuckled, a cold sound that sent a shiver down Lucas's spine. "Oh, I don't think so. You've been meddling in things you don't understand. But don't worry, you won't have to for much longer." Lucas's gaze darted to the gun in Fletcher's hand, then to the men flanking him. He knew he had seconds to act, or none at all. But before anyone could move, a sharp voice rang out from the shadows. "Drop the weapon!" Fletcher turned sharply, his eyes narrowing as Megan stepped into the clearing, the gun in her hands, trained on him. "Well, isn't this a surprise?" Fletcher said, his tone dripping with disdain. "Let him go," Megan demanded, her voice steady. Fletcher tilted his head, his smile cold. "Or what? You'll shoot me?" Megan didn't flinch. "Try me." The men flanking Fletcher raised their weapons, but the sound of sirens in the distance froze them in place. "Police!" one of them muttered, his confidence wavering. Fletcher's expression darkened. He raised his gun, aiming it at Lucas. "This isn't over," he snarled. Before he could fire, Megan squeezed the trigger, her shot grazing Fletcher's arm and forcing him to drop his weapon with a pained cry. Lucas lunged forward, tackling the nearest man to the ground as chaos erupted in the clearing. Moments later, red and blue lights lit up the forest as police swarmed the scene. Officers shouted orders, weapons drawn as they surrounded Fletcher and his men. Lucas stood beside Megan, his chest heaving as the officers restrained Fletcher, who glared at them with a mix of rage and defiance. "This isn't over," Fletcher hissed, his voice low and venomous. Megan's grip on the gun tightened, her jaw set. "Yes, it is," she said quietly. The weight of the night finally eased as the police led Fletcher and his men away. Megan turned to Lucas, her eyes searching his face. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft. Lucas nodded, exhaustion and relief flooding through him. "Thanks to you." Megan exhaled shakily, lowering the gun. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to believe that they might be safe. At the end of month, the courtroom was packed, the air charged with anticipation. Reporters lined the back row, their pens poised over notepads, while the low hum of murmured conversations filled the space. At the center of it all sat Fletcher, his once commanding demeanor reduced to a simmering glare as he listened to the prosecution detail the charges against him. Lucas sat a few rows behind, his face a mask of calm as he watched the proceedings. Beside him, Megan shifted nervously, her hands tightly clasped in her lap. She glanced at Lucas, her eyes questioning. "It's almost over," Lucas murmured, his voice low but reassuring. Megan nodded, though her heart still raced. Police statements, legal meetings, and sleepless nights filled the months leading up to this trial. The documents Lucas had risked everything to retrieve were the cornerstone of the case, unraveling Fletcher's vast web of corruption, extortion, and murder. When the verdict was finally read, guilty on all counts, the room erupted in whispers. Megan closed her eyes, a wave of relief washing over her. Beside her, Lucas's hand tightened briefly on hers before he pulled away, his expression softening as he looked at her. "It's done," he said. She nodded, a small, tentative smile breaking through. The weeks that followed felt surreal. Without the constant threat of danger, life began to settle into something resembling normalcy. Megan and her children stayed with Lucas for a while longer, the house slowly filling with warmth and laughter. Roy and Doris began to flourish, their guarded expressions giving way to bright smiles. Lucas found himself drawn to their small joys, Doris's delight in baking cookies that always came out a little burnt, Roy's insistence on teaching him a card game that he swore was way cooler than poker. One evening, Megan found Lucas in the study, a rare glass of whiskey in his hand as he stared at a photograph of Charles. "I couldn't have done this without you," he said, without turning around. Megan hesitated at the door before stepping inside. "And I couldn't have done it without you." Lucas finally looked at her, his eyes heavy with something deeper than gratitude. "Charles would have been proud of us," he said quietly. Megan swallowed hard, her gaze falling to the photo. "He deserved better. They all did." Lucas nodded, the weight of loss etched into his face. "At least now, they'll get justice." One afternoon, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, Lucas and Megan took the twins to a nearby park. It was a simple outing, just a picnic and a soccer ball, but it felt monumental. Doris's laughter rang out as she chased after the ball, her hair streaming behind her. Roy, ever the strategist, tried to outmaneuver Lucas, who played along with exaggerated groans and dramatic falls. Megan sat on the blanket, her hands resting loosely around a cup of lemonade. She watched the scene with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. Lucas jogged over, his face flushed but smiling. "I think Roy's trying to take my spot on the team," he said, collapsing onto the blanket beside her. Megan laughed softly. "You'd better watch out. He's competitive." "So am I," Lucas replied, his tone playful. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the distant shouts of the twins filling the air. "I've been thinking," Lucas said, his voice quieter now. Megan turned to him, her brow furrowing. "About what's next?" he continued, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "For you, for them, for us." Megan's breath caught at the last word, but she kept her expression neutral. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've been so focused on surviving. I haven't thought much beyond that." Lucas nodded, his face softening. "You don't have to decide anything now. Just know that I want to be part of whatever comes next." Megan's heart ached at the sincerity in his voice. She wasn't ready to make promises, but for the first time in years, the idea of a future didn't feel like an impossible dream. Fletcher's sentencing was broadcast across every major network. The footage of him being led away in handcuffs became a symbol of justice served, a reminder that even the most powerful could be brought down. Lucas and Megan watched the news together, the twins playing quietly in the background. As the segment ended, Lucas turned to Megan. "This is just the beginning," he said. "For all of us." Megan smiled faintly, her gaze lingering on the screen. For the first time, the idea of moving forward didn't feel so daunting. The morning sunlight streamed through the wide glass windows of Lucas's home, casting a warm glow on the wooden floors. The house, once eerily quiet, now hummed with life. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the faint scent of burnt toast. A product of Doris's latest attempt to help Megan make breakfast. "Mom, look," Doris called, holding up a plate of slightly charred pancakes, her face bright with pride. Megan laughed softly, stepping over to inspect. "You're getting better," she said, ruffling Doris's hair. "Next time, maybe less heat." Lucas entered the kitchen, his tie hanging loosely around his neck. He paused to watch the scene, a smile tugging at his lips. "Morning, Chef Doris," he said, reaching for a piece of toast. Doris grinned. "I made pancakes too." "She's improving," Megan chimed in, setting a plate on the table. "Improving is good," Lucas teased, biting into the toast and wincing dramatically. "Definitely better than last time." Doris giggled, and even Roy, who sat at the table with a book, cracked a smile. The days had settled into a rhythm. Breakfasts filled with chatter and laughter, afternoons spent exploring the city or lounging in the backyard, and evenings where the four of them would gather for a movie or board game. It was a life Megan had almost forgotten was possible. One afternoon, Megan sat on the porch with a cup of tea, her gaze fixed on the twins as they played in the yard. Roy was teaching Doris how to throw a frisbee, his instructions precise but patient. Lucas stepped outside, a beer in hand. He leaned against the railing beside her, his presence grounding. "They're happy," he said, nodding toward the twins. "They're safe," Megan replied, her voice soft. Lucas glanced at her. "And you?" Megan hesitated, her fingers tightening around the mug. "I'm learning how to be," she admitted. "It's been so long since I felt normal." Lucas's gaze softened. "You don't have to rush it," he said. "Healing takes time." She looked at him, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Thank you for everything." "You don't have to thank me," Lucas said, his voice steady. "You and the kids deserve this." Later that evening, they sat together in the living room, a fire crackling in the hearth. Roy and Doris were sprawled on the rug, working on a puzzle, while Megan and Lucas shared the couch. "This house feels different now," Lucas said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. Megan looked at him, her brow furrowing. "Different how?" "Warmer," he replied, his tone light but sincere. "Alive." Megan smiled, the weight in her chest lifting slightly. Roy held up a puzzle piece triumphantly. "Found it." Doris clapped, and the two children huddled closer to complete the picture. Lucas leaned back, his arm resting along the back of the couch. "They're incredible," he said quietly. "They are," Megan agreed, her gaze softening as she watched her children. As the days turned into weeks, Megan began to think about the future. The trauma of the past still lingered, but it no longer consumed her. She found herself imagining a life here, in this house filled with laughter and love. Lucas never pushed, but his quiet support was constant. Whether it was helping Roy with homework, teaching Doris how to tie her shoes, or simply being present, he had become a steady presence in their lives. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Megan stood on the porch with Lucas. The twins were inside, giggling over a game of charades. "Have you thought about what's next?" Lucas asked, his voice soft. Megan turned to him, her heart thumping with excitement. "I have," she said. Lucas's gaze met hers, a question lingering in his eyes. "I want to stay," Megan continued, her voice steady. "I want the kids to have this. To have you." Lucas's breath caught, but he quickly recovered, a warm smile spreading across his face. "I'd like that," he said simply. Megan nodded, a sense of peace settling over her. For the first time in years, the future felt like something to look forward to, not fear. That night, as the twins fell asleep in their beds and the house grew quiet, Megan and Lucas sat together on the couch, their shoulders brushing. "This feels like home," Megan said softly, almost to herself. "It is," Lucas replied, his voice filled with quiet conviction. Megan believed it, forever. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. Share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values, yet entertaining. See you there.